From Acres USA, you are listening to the Acres USA podcast, a conversational podcast where we'll explore sustainable farming, regenerative practices, and the latest innovations in eco-agriculture with some of your favorite farmers and ranchers. I'm your host, Taylor Henry, the owner and CEO of Acres USA. Welcome to the Acres USA podcast. All right, we are joined with Austin Unruh of Trees for Grazers. Austin's one of an author of one of the books that we have in our library, Trees for Grazers. I think it's a very interesting book. I was actually just looking through it yesterday because we planted a bunch of trees in the last year. We did 2,500 chestnuts, and we did some thornless honey locust. But I am interested in your tubing method with the barbed wire.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I was looking at that, how you got, because you had a nice picture of it in the book. Well, first thing I'm going to ask is, does that really hold up throughout a whole year of grazing? Because because tubes don't, just general tubes do not hold up.
No, just tubes as they are. No,
for sure.
Yep.
What we did with the trees that we planted this year is we planted them along paddock lines, and they don't have tubes. They're just right along the fence line. I did learn quickly. Luckily, you have good cattle that are broke to hot wire, but we don't want that hot wire touching the trees constantly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how does that, I guess, let's talk about your a quick overview of the system that you've been installing for folks in grazing with trees.
Yeah. So the system that we work around is based on a 6-foot tall tree shelter. That's made by a company called Plantra. They're based out of Minnesota. So it's 6 foot tall. The tube is plastic, and there's a fiberglass stake on the inside. And the beauty of that system is that it's all an electrical insulator. So then you can use electric fencing to protect the tree tube from livestock. So the tube prevents browsing on the tree, and then the electric fencing prevents the rubbing up on the tube. So we've experimented with all kinds of different means of getting these trees established in a pasture and in an actively grazed pasture without taking the livestock out and taking the land out of production. And the barbed wire is unfortunately not something that we recommend to our clients anymore. So we tried that. It works a little bit. I think it helps, but it's not as useful as it should be. So what we recommend to our clients instead is to use electric fencing along these rows of trees. So either we're running the poly wire at, let's say, knee height, so wherever you would for your normal paddock division fencing, or we're running that poly wire at 6 feet high, so at the top of those tubes, so that the livestock can move underneath that wire. And then we'll clip onto that wire and we'll wrap an aluminum wire around the tube so that the tube itself is then all electrified. So that way we're taking almost no land space out of production. And those shelters are perfectly well protected. Livestock learn pretty quickly not to rub up on them. You're muted right now.
Sorry about that. The actual tube itself gets electrified.
Yep. So we're wrapping aluminum wire around that tube.
Do you keep the tube off the ground somehow?
So the tube goes right down to the ground, and then we only keep the wire, the wire would go down to a foot or two off the ground.
Got it. So it's still a plastic tube. Yep. Just the wire doesn't ground on the tube. Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, they would. I feel like you get a nice shock on them a few times, and they would stop.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Stop messing around with the tubes.
Exactly.
Have you seen? Is there a certain maturity that works? What is like the years of after you planted a tree where you stop being concerned about them messing with it?
Yeah, we're only just starting to get there on some of our older plantings, and we've been planting. Our oldest planting is now 5 years old. So, and that's with our faster growing species like our black locust, our hybrid poplars, our hybrid willows, where we could remove the protection and they would be just fine. Those are probably 4 or 5 inches diameter at the base. And so those are fine. The problem is that we also have a whole bunch of persimmons and oaks and honey locusts and slower growing trees mixed in there. And those still need protection, even though our fast growing superstars don't.
Yeah. Let's go back a little bit with your background. How did you get
Mm-hmm.
into this? What type of life experiences put you into this position that you're in now?
Yep. I have very, very few qualifications for what I do. I
Join
didn't
the
go to
club.
school for it. I didn't grow up on a farm. I didn't even grow up in the country, really. But in college, I realized, I wanted to do something with my hands. I want to do something outside. Um, and then I read Mark Shepard's book, Restoration Agriculture, and I loved it. And I said, this is what I want to be able to do, is this large landscape scale restoration and regeneration through agriculture, where you're making the agricultural system more resilient, more diverse, more profitable for farms, and you're also restoring the ecosystem. So that's really what I wanted to do. And so I worked my way towards agroforestry, and I started off with a business that was really just focused on taking care of stream buffers. I'm in an area where there's a lot of pollution going down to the Chesapeake Bay, so there's a lot of funding available for planting trees along streams, and there just wasn't any.
Where you guys at?
We're in southeastern Pennsylvania, Lancaster County, so big Amish area, a lot of small dairies in our area. So that was my entry into the world of agroforestry professionally. And once we got into that, I had a couple clients who were also grazing livestock in their pastures. They were doing grass-fed dairy, and they were saying, we would love to have shade in our pastures, but we don't know how to get those trees established. So can we figure out together how to get those trees established? And that was back in 2020 that we did our very first silvopasture planting. And I realized pretty quickly that if we could figure out how to simply and easily get these trees established in a pasture, that it would open up whole new worlds of opportunity. Because the integration of trees in the pasture, just having shade for cattle makes a world of a difference. And having that shade distributed well throughout your pastures, so that you can graze any one of your pastures at any time of the year, any time of day. It just gives producers so much more flexibility, so much more ability to use their pastures well and efficiently, and it's better for their livestock and better for their productivity.
Got it. What are some of the things that when did you start connecting the dots? I guess what were some examples of things that didn't work, and then what have you found
Mm-hmm.
that led you to the ideas that you have now?
Yeah. So I'll say one of the things that I started with was I wanted to work on riparian buffers and stream buffers, and get more people to do those, because it's one of the most important conservation practices that we have, especially in this area. But I found out that what I was pitching to farmers is say, hey, let's plant elderberries, let's plant pawpaws, let's plant persimmons, let's plant all these really cool productive species in our stream buffer. Most folks weren't interested in that. Most folks are conventional farmers, and they spend all day on a tractor, and they're not going to get off their tractor to then harvest a whole bunch of elderberries, and then what, like make them into elderberry syrup and sell them on Facebook Marketplace, or harvest a bunch of pawpaws and sell them at a farmer's market. You're not going to do that if you're a conventional farmer. So I quickly realized that this like agroforestry integration of like productive stuff along a riparian buffer wasn't going to be very scalable. There's some people that would do it, but like really, if I'm going to if I'm going to have a business doing elderberries or pawpaws, I'm probably going to go find nice farmland and do it there, where it's easy to access. I don't have a stream running through the middle of my field. It's not wet. It's not going to flood. All of those things. So the I couldn't move the needle a terrible amount in riparian buffers. But in silvopasture, it just, rather than taking that land out of production on the farm, it really well integrates into, and it enhances the farm operation there for the farmer. And one of the big things there was, uh, the current way of doing things was that you would take a strip of land out of production. You'd fence out an area, maybe 3 or 4 feet on either side of a row of trees, and you'd fence that out for the first, let's say, 8 years while those trees get established, so that the livestock can't get in on there. The downside is you lose production, and you create an area where there's a whole bunch of weeds growing up. You have to get in there and mow or weed eat, and it's a lot more labor. Your mortality is higher, and your tree mortality is fairly high because there's a whole bunch of voles in that area because there's nice tall grass. And it's just really, it's not very practical for farmers. So in our early conversations with our clients, we were told very clearly that this needs to be very, very simple for us to do, or it's just not going to make sense. And that's where we came up with this idea of using these tree shelters and using electric fencing to protect those tubes.
How's it been received as far as, obviously you've been on a lot of farms. What's the
Mm-hmm.
consistent thing what's the feedback you get from the farmer that says no?
Well, we don't work with them.
Yeah.
Overall, we've worked with over 50 clients by now. Whether we've already done the planting or the planting is in the pipeline, and that's really just in the hour around us. Like, we have a very, very small geography that we've focused most of our energy on, and we've found a tremendous amount of interest and willingness to do silvopasture if we can make it easy for them. And we really just focus on working with people they're already there, right? So they're already grazing intensively. They're already doing grass-fed beef or grass-fed dairy, or many of them are organic, but they have a pretty significant pasture component to their operation. So they're already thinking about multiple paddocks, rotational grazing, moving every day or every couple days, and I need to have shade everywhere. And then we throw in as a bonus, hey, let's plant species that are also going to drop feed, like a honey locust or a persimmon. And let's plant species that you could use as fodder if we have a really severe drought, like we're in a drought right now. If we have a drought, those trees are going to provide fodder. So we're getting extra bonuses there. There's not a ton of folks that we approach and they say, no, this doesn't make sense for me. There's probably places on the farm that don't make sense. Maybe you want to keep areas open for hay, or you need access through a certain area. And so we work with that. But rarely do we find someone that is raising livestock out on pasture, and says, no, I don't want silvopasture. I don't want trees spread throughout my farm. Some people are saying, let me wait and see how other people do it and how other people like it, and then maybe I'll decide. And cost is probably the biggest barrier to folks, and so a lot of our work is focused on finding cost share for farmers, because however you do it, it's a pretty significant upfront cost, and trees take a while to grow and give you a return on that investment. So
What's
that's
some of
probably the
the
biggest bottleneck for us.
Yeah. What's some of the cost share programs that you guys work with?
Yeah, locally we've been able to work with a number of water quality groups. Again, going back to that Chesapeake Bay thing, there's a lot of water quality related money in our area, and that's been our saving grace when it comes to silvopasture. And that's like a local a local group here or there, and oftentimes it's only for a year or two that they have this program running. And so we've had to be very, very flexible and find different programs to work with over time. Now we have access to a climate smart commodities grant on a couple of our couple of grants that we're partnering on, and those have been great. Those are big USDA grants. that have filtered down to more local organizations that we're now working with. One thing that I would love to see is for our state NRCS to support silvopasture. At this point,
Yes.
Pennsylvania does not. A lot of states do. A lot of Midwestern states in particular have really good support for silvopasture. They'll pay $30, $40 per tree. And that's something that we want to see yet, because the real upside of having NRCS support for this program is, it's going to be there year after year after year, whereas these water quality grants, they come and go. They're short-lived programs, and so we have to keep going after different sources of funding. But if you as a farmer can go to the USDA or to your NRCS office and sign up for EQIP, and they have silvopasture as one of the cost-shared programs, then you can sign up now. You can sign up another 2 years. You can do this in phases. And what we really recommend to folks is do a silvopasture project over the course of quite a few years. Don't bite off more than you can chew, and try to plant all of your trees at once, because it's a lot to do. It's a lot to manage, but then also, like, this is a permanent thing. Once you put it in, you're not going to go move it. So we want to make sure that we're putting in the right stock, the right genetics, and putting it in the right place with the right layout in a way that we know that you can safely protect those trees and get them to maturity. So we recommend folks take the slow and steady approach. And if you have funding that can be available, that is going to be available in a couple of years, that helps you take that slow and steady approach.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that prevented me from diving headfirst into getting trees in the ground was cost. We did an initial plan about 500. They didn't do very well as far as survival.
Mm.
I think tubes. Well, I think the stake height was the issue because we ended up having a lot of trees that got bent over by the tube
To
with wind.
flop. Yeah.
Yeah. And then just pure laziness where, if you did let the cattle into an area with those tubes, they ended up destroying them.
Hmm.
So yeah, we tried this year where we didn't use the tubes. I think a higher stake is important. How tall are you guys' stakes with your tubes?
Yeah, the stakes that we use are, I think the stakes themselves are 84 inches and the tubes are 72 inches. So
Yeah.
the stake comes up to within a couple inches of the top of the tube once you've driven it into the ground a good 16 inches or whatever that is.
How do you when you communicate with farmers, how do you, I guess, weigh the options of, because we went the route of just planting more trees closer together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, because when I look at it, it's like you get a good deal on a large bundle of trees. That
Mm-hmm.
price per tree gets driven down a lot.
Yeah.
Well, and then you almost have as much or if not more into the tube and stake system.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
have you installed systems that are more of just more trees that they know they have to thin out over time, or they kind of self-select, or are you pretty on the tubes just because if someone brings you guys out, you want to make sure that they have, you know, better survival rates?
Yeah. That's where we lean is I would rather have more control and know exactly which trees are going to survive. Plant 100 trees and know that like 90 of those are going to survive, and we can go back and replant the rest of them that don't survive, especially as we get to the point where we have our nursery is able to churn out really nice stock with the right genetics and in large, let's say a 4 to 6 foot tall tree. If I put that out there, I really want that to survive, right? Like we've put quite a bit into it, and because it's large and because it's robust and because we know how to protect those trees, we know that that tree has a 95% chance of getting established and surviving and thriving. So that's definitely what we lean towards. We haven't done any plantings ourselves where we're just planting a whole bunch of stock, more of a stun method. But one of our consultants, that's what he did on his farm initially, was a much more high density planting, um, and it's worked. I'd say it's slower. Like each tree has a slower growth rate, is what I've seen. Just because there's more competition, it's harder to protect each tree individually and provide them the care that they want to really get going. And another thing that I like, especially on the farms that we work with as our clients, I like when I can say we're going to have this many feet between our trees. We're going to have this kind of layout. It's just it's clearer. We can more clearly communicate what this is going to look like to our clients if we know that these trees that we plant out are going to survive, rather than saying let's put a whole bunch of trees and they're going to be 5 feet apart, but eventually we're going to have them 30 feet apart, and we're just going to go through there and then select which trees to remove over time. But then you, as you know, like you end up with a little bit more of a random spacing, where maybe you have 10 trees in a row that died and then 3 trees in a row that survived, and you have gaps in there and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I like that for a business, for professionality's sake, I like that we can offer just a lot more clarity.
What species are you targeting for extra feed and fodder?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So for ruminants, cattle, sheep, goats, but most of our work is with cattle. We're looking at honey locust and persimmon as our mast crops. So our crops that are going to drop from the tree and provide additional feed during the winter months. And then for fodder, then we look to mulberry or hybrid poplar or hybrid willow as our main fodder, like leaf fodder crops for those. And then on the monogastric side, so your pigs, your poultry, there we're looking at. I mean, there's so many things that
Yeah.
those can eat: mulberries, persimmons, apples, acorns, chestnuts, hickories, all kinds of different stuff that those can consume.
Have you seen cattle consuming chestnuts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So I have a pasture here on my in-laws' property, and there's apples and there's chestnuts in that pasture, and there's a couple steers, and the steers tend to hang out underneath the chestnuts even more than they did the apples. Like they like the apples, they'll pick them up, and they look like the steers look nice and fat and slick.
Yeah.
So they would eat the apples, but they would hang out under those chestnuts even more so, and they seem to like those a little bit more, and be waiting for those to drop.
What's the timing on it? When have you seen? Is it do you see like right when they drop, they start cleaning them up, or
Yeah.
do they let them sit on the ground for a little bit longer?
No, they seem to clean them up right away.
Hi there, just wanted to interrupt this episode to make sure that you have heard about our Acres 2024 Eco Egg Conference. This year's event will be held in Madison, Wisconsin from December 2nd through December 5th. I think we have put together one of the best lineups for a conference in the regenerative and organic agriculture space. Gabe Brown, Alan Williams, and their team from Understanding Ag, along with Joel Salatin, John Kemp, Gary Zimmer, Mark Shepard, Dr. Nasha Winters, Megan Neubauer, Matt Powers, Nigel Palmer, Will Harris, Jeff Poppin, Aaron Silva, Austin Unruh, Andre Liu, Jay Fuhrer, Steve Diver, and many more. So if you're interested, feel free to give us a call at 970-392-4464 or email us at support@acresusa.com. You can also register online at acresusa.com/eco-ag.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's, what chestnut drop is usually September in your
Yep.
region.
Yep. Yep. We're October 23 right now, and we're done. We're done with chestnut drop. We're mostly done with our apples too.
Yeah. Have you seen in systems that you guys have installed where if someone is rotating, say they come around like this time of the year, they haven't been there since August or July, do you believe that they'll clean up those chestnuts that have been sitting there for a month?
That's a big problem with rotational grazing and ruminants in particular, because you've got 30, 40, 50 days till you're back around to a spot. So especially if you have stuff that's dropping early in the season when it's warm, and stuff decomposes quicker, you're only going to have a fraction of what dropped is still going to be good by the time you get back around. And so that's been a major limiting factor. Now, if someone is does continuous grazing in an area, it wouldn't be a problem because they always have access to the apple tree or to the chestnut tree or whatever.
Yeah.
Or it would be a case where you want to think about adaptive grazing, adaptive management, where you bring your livestock into that area every couple days during the mast season, knowing that that's not going to be great for your forages, but you have all that additional feed that's dropping, and it's not going to be good if you don't come through regularly. So that would be more of an idea of using adaptive management strategies to make use of that drop.
So
Now,
you want to time it to get them in those areas
yep,
throughout September and October.
and you'd probably design it so that you'd have blocks that you could go to specifically and target those areas. The nice thing about honey locust pods is that those will drop in like November, December, January, and they don't go bad very quickly. Like they're robust pods. They have a lot of sugar inside of them, but the outside of the pod keeps them really nice. And they're dropping during a time of year when it's cold and things just don't go bad very quick. So that fits perfectly in a rotational grazing system where even if they drop 30, 50 days before you're coming back around, they're still good once you come back.
Yeah, we planted thornless honey locusts along our cover crop fields that are that we winter graze. The
Mm-hmm.
idea would be, man, if you could get those extra calories out of that, that would. I mean, what's some of the research that you've done? Like, what are they getting out of some of these plants? Like, what are they getting out of honey locusts in the winter?
Yeah, yeah. Honey locust in particular, it's a lot of energy, a lot of sugar. So I've got pods that I picked up here recently where you can squeeze the sugar right out of them. It's like jelly coming out of them. So that's really the main draw. The protein, like there's a little bit of protein in the pods, but livestock typically have plenty of protein in their forages during that time of the year, especially. So it's really the energy and the energy boost that we're going after, and that's where, like for us on our nursery, we are developing honey locust trees that are completely female. So like female trees are the only ones that are going to drop pods. So we want female trees that are completely thornless, and will continue to be thornless because sometimes if you plant a seedling tree that is, let's say, 2 feet tall and it's thornless right now, it might develop thorns by the time it's 6 feet tall or 10 feet tall. So that's a lesson that we learned the hard way,
And
and we don't want to repeat.
what's the issue with the thorns?
There's a lot of issues with the thorns. They're nasty, and they only get bigger over age. Whereas like a black locust or an Osage orange, they'll have thorns on their young growth, and then the older growth doesn't have thorns anymore. On a thorny honey locust tree, they have thorns on their young growth and on their old growth. Like a thorny honey locust tree can have just a like 12-inch long thorns on the trunk, and then you're looking at like pop tires. Potentially problem with hooves, although I haven't heard that as much as really just the tires thing is the biggest one, and people will curse at it a
Yeah.
lot. And that's why we're very, very thoughtful about what we want to put out there, and we want to explain to folks, here's all the things that we've done, here's all like a full disclaimer of um, we're doing our absolute best to make sure that this tree has no thorns, but this is how it is for the next generation too, like the seeds, like the seedlings that come up from this tree. Our goal is that whatever we plant out, that it's going to be genetically thornless and have very, very low chances that the progeny that come up in the pasture would have thorns on them. So those are all the different things that we're working on, is to have a thornless, all female, high yielding, high sugar tree uh, for widespread silvopasture use.
And then what are you excited about with hogs? I think there's a lot of potential with these
Mm-hmm.
trees and running hogs on pasture.
Yep. So I look at it this way: that silvopasture for ruminants, and particularly cattle, because cattle are everywhere, that has the largest scale of applicability. For someone who's running cattle, it just makes sense to have shade and to have additional feed.
What's some of the things that in your research we talk about shade all the time, but what
Mm-hmm.
is some of the important details that people should be aware about of what shade gives them? I think any grazer that sees
Yeah.
cattle getting access to shade versus not shade, it's obvious. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but do you have some data or research that shows, really the importance of shade as far as, average daily gain during those hot days
Mm-hmm.
versus not
Mm-hmm.
having shade?
Yeah. Yep. So the livestock are going to be more comfortable. They're going to be more productive. They're going to put on more weight. They're going to give more milk, depending on what kind of what kind of class animals you have. There's been some research on it. I think I have some data in the book, and I refer to research studies on it. One study that was done in Kentucky, I believe the average there was that they were producing an additional zero point 0.9 pounds per day when they had access to shade.
That's huge.
So it's significant. Yep, it really adds to the bottom line. Um, it's going to be profitable in and of itself just by having trees there for shade for your livestock, because they're going to gain better, they're going to produce more. But then when we talk about hogs, going back to that, so for hogs, and the same applies for poultry, is now we can think about producing our own feed, our own perennial sources of feed on the land. Because for ruminants, the land is already producing all of their forages. All the feed that they need is coming from the forages from the land, basically for free. But for hogs and poultry, people are having to import most of the feed for those livestock, right? And it's not cheap, especially if we want to do non-GMO or we want to do organic. And so the main driver of expenses in pigs and poultry is feed, and really someone raising those on pasture is probably having to feed about as much as someone raising those in a CAFO. And so there's not really much economic incentive to raise those livestock on pasture. There's a lot of better animal welfare, better land stewardship, if you're taking good care of them on pasture, but there's not a lot of economic incentive and a lot of feed differential. So that's what we want to do. Is I want to thoughtfully integrate trees in there that are going to drop a lot of feed and reduce that cost of raising your pigs and your poultry out on pasture, while also giving you a better product that's going to stand out in the market, because you have acorn finished hogs or persimmon finished turkeys or mulberry finished broilers. That's the kind of thing that we see as being a real game changer in the way that people do pastured livestock.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking with Mark Shepard last week, and we compared our numbers as far as what it took us to raise out hogs versus what he's done in the past. And
Mm,
it took him about a month longer because he pushed them a lot harder to go forage, but
okay.
his costs were almost cut in half as far as the
Okay.
amount of feed that he gave them
Mm-hmm.
versus what we just fed out with our group this year. So it's, there's probably,
That's great.
if I do the quick math as far as timing versus the amount of feed, it's probably a 25-30% profitability increase
Mm-hmm.
but he's 27 years ahead. He's got the mass there.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, I think it's just between the shade, the hogs, the extra feed, I mean, you can extrapolate out how this pays for itself and gives you an
Mm-hmm.
ROI.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think the ROI on hog feed and poultry feed is going to be uh, the most significant, the highest ROI, and also the fastest. In particular, if you're looking at trees like mulberries that are going to start yielding very quick.
Yeah. um so kind of going back to some, because hogs obviously like shade too. What are some of
Mm-hmm.
these
Yep.
species? Do you mix, say you plant a line of um, locust or chestnut, do you then mix in that same line trees that'll get the shade quicker?
Yeah. Yep. That's often what we do is we'll plant a longer term tree species, whether that's a honey locust or persimmon or chestnut or whatever it is. And then we'll put in a black locust or a hybrid poplar or something like that that's going to provide shade in 3-4 years. And then we'll only keep that tree around most likely for another couple years while those slower growing species are filling in. And then we'll take out those faster growing species, or we'll coppice them, or we'll pollard them so that they're still around and they're able to offer fodder, but they're not as big and they're not casting as much shade. Something that we'll likely end up doing here in the next number of years is if I can put out a nice 6-7 foot tall honey locust, and we'll take really good care of it. We mulch it really good at establishment. Maybe I'm just putting those trees out at their final spacing anyway, 30-40 feet apart, so that we're not having to come back and thin, because most of our clients don't really care to thin all that much. They would rather just have the trees out at their final density, and wait another year or 2 or 3 until they have the shade. But especially if we can start with nice, tall, robust trees, that we're going to get another year or 2 head start on those trees rather than planting a little 1-foot seedling in there. I think that's what we'll probably trend towards, is planting them a little bit further apart, at their closer to their final density.
Yeah. How long is it? What age would chestnuts and honey locusts provide shade, and persimmons?
Yeah, those are going to grow close enough to the same speed. You're probably talking 6 years or so till they're providing a significant amount of shade from those trees.
And then the forage kind of comes along with that same timeline.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We're starting to see some of our 4 or 5-year-old honey locust developing some pods. It's not a lot, and those are seedlings. Once we have grafted, clonally propagated material, those would yield significantly sooner. And they might grow more. They would grow more uniformly too, and especially one that is selected for vigorous growth would grow on the faster end of that too.
Are you selecting the next generation? What are some of the key things you're looking for when you select and choose what the next generation of trees will be? Is it quick growth, survival
Mm-hmm.
rate? What are the top things you're looking at?
Yeah, it really depends on the species. For mulberry, we want to know when those are going to drop. So it's nice to have some ever-bearing species that are going to drop over a really long period of time. It's also nice to have some species that are going to drop in like a 2 or 3 week block, and so you can have a block of them here and there, and you're going to have a lot of feed right there over a certain period of time. But then I want early droppers, I want middle droppers, I want late droppers. I want trees that are vigorous for the most part. On mulberries, I want to have trees that are there for really high quality leaf fodder. I want the same thing for persimmons. Going to want early droppers, middle droppers, and late droppers, so that I can plan out where I'm going to have these along my farm. And then for the honey locusts, we'd already talked about the thornlessness being very, very key to them. And then all female and high yielding.
Yeah. Well, Austin, what do you plan on talking about at the Acres Conference this year?
Quite a bit.
Is it your first time being at the conference, or have
This
you been in
is
the past?
this is indeed my first time being at the Acres Conference. Yep. I'm
All
looking
right.
forward to it. I can talk about trees all day long. We'll really get into the nitty gritty of silvopasture.
Yeah. What's some of the key things that in a enclosed workshop like that people can probably walk away from?
Yeah. So one, we'll want people to be able to walk away with just a sense of, I can do this. I can do this on my own operation. I know how to get these trees established, and I know at least roughly like what species are going to work for me in my context and to fit my goals. That at the very basics, and then I would love to be able to get into more details of some of the bigger picture stuff and where in the country this makes the most sense, and how to get Costshare, and how to make a budget for this, what your like return on investment might be, those kind of things that we could dive into if we have more time.
Yeah. And how do you see this all playing out over the next 30 years? What's your vision for all of this?
There's over 100 million acres in the eastern part of the United States that we can eat. That's already in pasture, and we can easily add trees to it. Like that just makes sense. And then there's a lot more cropland and hay ground that I think can be more profitably run as silvopasture than in crops. I would like to get a lot of land out of crops, and I would like to get a lot of pigs and poultry out of CAFOs and back onto the land where they want to be, right? And I think silvopasture has a real opportunity to make a real difference, so that the pasturing those might actually be much more profitable than it was otherwise. And so then having that land in pasture is more profitable than it would be otherwise. And then for farms, like I want small farms to be able to thrive, while also making that the farm ecosystem better, and the farm economics better. That's what I see silvopasture as being able to do.
Yeah. Do you see an advantage as far as managing those trees with the livestock, as far as controlling pests and different things that those trees would fall susceptible to?
Yeah, it's a whole lot easier to manage trees for livestock feed than it is to manage trees for human food, right? Because if you're managing an apple orchard for human consumption, all those apples have to be spotless. They have to be like, you can't have the pest and disease pressure. You can't have the scab and those kind of things. Whereas for livestock, it just doesn't matter so much. So I think the livestock can have a beneficial impact, and the quality of the fruit doesn't matter as much, because the livestock will eat it one way or another.
Do you see a way that the future of orchards have livestock integration with them, so the people that are actually producing those crops for profit have a better way to integrate with livestock?
I would love to see that. Now, that's not my specialty, but I would love to see that, and people will be able to come in as a contract grazer, whether it's with sheep or geese or ducks, something that's low impact, but they're able to disrupt pest and disease cycles. I would love to see that.
Yeah. I always think one of the documentaries that really captured me was the Biggest Little Farm documentary.
Mm-hmm.
And when they sent those geese out into those orchards, I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense.
Yep. Exactly.
Ate all the snails up.
Yep.
That's very
And
cool.
in that case, the livestock are really, like, in most of our work, the livestock are the main economic driver of the system. Like, you're selling meat or you're selling dairy. In this case, if it's an orchard, then the orchard is still the economic driver, and then the livestock are coming through as a service provider. So it's a different lens to look through, but I think we just need more integration, right? We need more thoughtful integration, and people who understand ecosystems and livestock types, and know how to combine those in thoughtful ways.
Yeah. All right, man. Where do people get a hold of you? And are you guys traveling all over the country yet with your service, or is
Not yet.
that's the
Yep.
future plan? So,
That's the
but
future.
are you
Expand.
able to right now? So say
We're
someone
able to
wants
provide
you.
consulting services, so we
Okay.
can do remote consulting for anyone. You can find out more about us at treesforgrazers.com. We have a lot of articles there, a lot of resources.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for joining us, and we're looking forward to having you this December in Madison.
Thanks for having me, Taylor. Looking forward to seeing you there.
All right, man. Thank you for listening to the Acres USA podcast, a podcast production of Acres USA. Find us on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, and other popular podcast platforms. Acres USA is North America's oldest publisher on production-scale organic and regenerative farming. For more than 50 years, our mission has been to help farmers, ranchers, and market gardeners grow food profitably, regeneratively, and with nature in mind. Find our books and other Acres USA media and learn about Acres USA events at acresusa.com. Read our online magazine at members.acresusa.com, and we'd like to thank Acres USA staff for their contributions to producing this podcast. This episode was edited and engineered by Weston Larson of Acres USA. And we're grateful to our guests for taking the time to talk with us about their experiences.